In this lesson, we'll talk a little bit more about working with subtools. So if we jump back to the eye that we created, you can see I separated it into two subtools. So right now we have the main eye and then the pupil. And you can see that those are listed here from top to bottom. If we want to kind of move down in the selection to the next subtool, we can hit this little arrow. If we want to actually move one of the subtools down along the list, we can use these arrows here, move those up or down. So I can put that here. Okay, so we can reorder them that way. Okay, if we go to list all, we can see all the subtools. We can also rename subtools here. So if I want to come in on this one and say rename, then I can just call this something like pupil. Then I can rename it that way. We can also choose either to view all of our subtools at their lowest level or all the subtools at their highest level. So we can say all low or all high. We can also duplicate subtools. So if I've got this pupil, I can just say duplicate, and you can see it creates a duplicate there. If I want to delete it, I can go ahead and just hit delete. It'll give me a little warning here, and I can say OK to that. We can also, if we have one subtool we want to keep and we want to delete everything else, we can select a subtool and then say delete other, or we can delete all. There are also methods for splitting subtools into new subtools based on their configuration. So if we have a lot of parts that are the same type of geometry, so think of bolts. We have a bunch of bolts that we've added and they're all the same pieces, but they're added a bunch of times. We can split all those similar parts into its own subtool. We can split unmasked points into its own subtool or masked points and so forth. And we can merge as well. So there are a lot of ways to split things into multiple subtools and also merge them into one subtool. And there are advantages for both. Having things split into multiple subtools is good because you have high poly counts that are available to you for each subtool. So you can get much higher. And sometimes even if you have something that seems like it's seamless, you can split that into multiple subtools and that'll give you more resolution for each one of those. Now in this case, I want to actually merge these together. So I can go ahead and come down to the merge group here. And I just can say merge down. I can merge similar or visible. I'll just go ahead and merge down. It's going to give me a warning, and now that's a single subtool. Now I've not lost the polygroups. I still have the polygroups there, so the polygroups are still a great way to organize things and be able to view different parts of your model, but now it's loaded into one tool. So I just don't want to have little pieces like that floating around. Now let's say I want to go back to our skin here and start to add things like the eyes. So we could come in now, and to add new geometry to an existing tool, we would want to append it as a new subtool. So we'll go append, and then we'll find our eye and append it, and you can see it's added it as a new subtool. We can then come in with that eye selected, and we can move it into position. We can come in here and sort of scale it down, and you can see that that's not affecting the other geometry, and we can kind of get it into position here. And whatever method you want to use to transform that, you can come in and start to move it around. Okay, so we get it in here. So something like that maybe. Okay, so once we have that, we could duplicate it and move it over. We can also use Subtool Master, which is a nice plugin here. You can see it under the Z plugin menu item. There's a lot of options in here. If you just want to open that up, the whole thing up, you can just hit Subtool Master, and you can see you have a lot of your options over here on the left. Now what I want to do is actually go ahead and mirror this over. So I've got one on one side. I want to create a new copy that's mirrored over a particular axis. In this case, this center axis along the X. So I'll go ahead and say mirror. It'll give us some options. Do we want to merge the new eye into one subtool? So in this case, we would have two eyes now as part of a single subtool, or we can append it as a new subtool, which will leave the original untouched. So let's go ahead and leave it append as new subtool, and then we can choose the axis upon which to mirror it. So it's giving us kind of a visual indication of what that will look like. We want to go across the x-axis, so we'll say OK. It's going to go through, and you can see it made a duplicate and it mirrored it over to the other side. Keep in mind, if you make changes to one of these subtools, it's not going to be updated on the other subtool. You'll have to remirror that over. Okay, So if you ever want to move that or rename it, you could come in and say, and actually if I should mention here, if I select a particular subtool and I hit the eye icon here, that's going to leave whatever I've selected visible, but it's going to turn the visibility off on everything else. You could then go back manually and turn on visibility for certain things. You can also use solo, and that is going to be found right here. And that will allow you to, whatever subtool you have selected, that's the only one you're going to see. Okay, and you can turn that off here. There's also a setting that you can use to actually be able to just click to solo that. So if you go into preferences and edit, allow click to solo. So now I can just click in here and solo. Now to be able to change to a different subtool, because when you're sculpting you have to be on that particular subtool. So for instance, if I've got the eye selected and now I want to start working on the body a little bit more, I have to change to that subtool. So I could come over here and select the body, or I can alt click in the canvas on the body and that'll automatically select that. So if I alt click and then click out here, it's going to solo that really quickly. I can select that eye, click out here. So there are ways to speed things up to be able to just isolate different subtools, and you can move them around that way. And again, you can rename things. So if this is the left eye, you could rename this eye left, and then maybe select this one, rename it eye right. If you wanted to move the order, you could move that down and reorganize it that way. Okay, let's open up one that has a few more subtools just so we can take a look at it. So I'm actually going to go ahead and let's load up this one. It's just our worm tool here, and you can see that it's going to have a bunch more subtools associated with it. So if we go through here, this is the main body. We've got fibers across the body, which we'll look at later. We've got the hair on the head and the eyebrows. We've got the teeth as separate subtools. I believe they're organized in a group, so you can see they're all separate. So we still have the methods for separating those out. We also have the two eyes, and then you can scroll down here. We have parts of the eye in there. We have the base. The bolts are their own subtool. And you can organize these however you like. This is kind of an interior of the base. It's hard to see. Here is the grate for the base, which we'll learn how to make a little bit later on. And then we've got sort of the ooze that's on the grate. We'll look at how to make that as well. And you can see here's some kind of ooze that's kind of sticking to our character. And these are all separate subtools. You can see we have quite an extensive list, but it's by no means the most you can have here. You can have a lot of subtools coming in here. If you want to rename those, again, you can do that, or you can reorganize them by moving them up and down the list. If you've got some more prominent subtools you're going to need a lot, maybe you want to move them close to the top. Or maybe you want to organize things close together, so putting the eyes next to each other, putting some things that are close to each other here. Whatever way makes sense to you, you can organize it in that way. Okay, and then just taking off solo, we can see all of our subtools and how they work together to create our finished model. All right, so through the process of working with this, we'll be working with subtools throughout the process, but just wanted to kind of give you a heads up on how to append new geometry to a tool and create more subtools. And then there are definitely methods of creating and splitting, and it's just how we sort of organize our model, because you're rarely going to have one that's just a seamless model made up of one piece. You're going to have a number of different pieces, and subtools is how you're going to be able to do that. And again, they have their own separate texture maps and maps that you create for those, normal maps and so forth. They have all their own settings. Okay, and also make sure to check out Subtool Master, because there's a lot of great tools in here as well that I use a lot. So the next thing that we'll talk about is another method of creating meshes, and that is shadow box. So this is a great way to really create some interesting hard surface pieces if you want to do that, and it's going to be created from masking in something called shadow box. So we'll take a look at that in the next lesson.